seorang penulis Amerika fiksi fantasi, dan dia terkenal dengan penulisan The Thieves dan sequelsnya 5 pada tahun 1997. The Thief diberi award Newbery Honor Book. So now, good evening, everybody. Miss Whalen Turner is an American writer of fantasy fiction for young adult, and she's best known for her novel The Thief and its 5 sequels. And The Thief was named also a Newbery Honor Book. The floor is yours, Megan.
Thank you very much, and thank you all very much for joining me here and for inviting me to address all of you. That was an absolutely beautiful introduction. Thank you, Swasti, and also Ambud. I think if I understood as the credits rolled, that was you in the song.
Yes.
And I'm sorry,
Yes.
I didn't catch the name of the person who wrote it, but Swasti sent me a translation of the lyrics, and that really was lovely, really lovely. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I thought I would open briefly by telling you just a little bit about myself, and then about some of the inspiration for my first novel, The Thief. I'll try not to talk too long, and and that will leave some time for individual questions if people want to ask them. So I am obviously an American. I'm here in Ohio. I am, however, not, I did not grow up here in Ohio. I did grow up in the United States. My family, when I was growing up, moved around very frequently. Every year or two, we moved to a new place. And when I graduated from college and got married, I married a professor, and we have continued to move every couple of years to different places. But we have been in Ohio now off and on for about 15 years. I did not, except for a few trips to Canada, I did not leave this country until I was grown. I had been married for a couple of years before I took what was for me a tremendously important trip to see Greece. When I was growing up, although I lived in a lot of different places, all of those places were very similar in geography, in geology, in the trees that grew in the area and the weather. And so I was very familiar with a certain kind of landscape and a certain kind of setting. Now, I read all different kinds of books when I was growing up, but probably the greatest influence at the time on fantasy writing was J.R. Tolkien and The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings. So all the time that I was growing up, there were always more books that were sort of imitations of J.R. Tolkien. And there were always more books that were being written and set in a world that looked a lot like Middle Earth. And I think that those of you who have read a lot of fantasy are probably well aware that so much of the sort of fantastic tradition in children's books is British mythology, European mythology, European settings. And I knew that I did not want to write another imitation of Tolkien. I really admired his work, and I thought that if people wanted to read Tolkien, they should go read The Hobbit. They should not be reading my imitation of The Hobbit or my imitation of The Lord of the Rings. So I wanted a setting for my story. I had in my head just the beginnings of an idea of a story, and I really couldn't start writing it until I chose a setting where I would put the story. And I knew I didn't want a world that looked like Middle Earth, but the world that I grew up in the United States looked like Middle Earth. And so when I went to imagine something different, I was hung up on the difficulty of writing something that would be different from Middle Earth, but that also wouldn't be so foreign to my readers that I would have to spend hundreds of pages explaining it. You know, I didn't want to create a whole different fantasy world. I still wanted it to seem familiar. And in 1992, we took our first trip to Greece. And as soon as I saw Greece, I knew that this is a world that would be immediately familiar to readers in the United States, but obviously not the setting of Tolkien's books. I knew as soon as I saw Greece that I really wanted to set a story in that landscape. And so it was probably a little more than a year later. As I said, I married a professor. And one of the wonderful things about his job was that he would from time to time receive a fellowship, a year-long residency at some research center or as a visiting professor. And in 1992, he received the fellowship with the John Simon Guggenheim Foundation. And we were going to be spending a year in San Diego. And it was because of this that I left my job in the bookstore where I was a buyer for children's books. And we took that trip to Greece and we moved for a year to San Diego, where he was a visiting professor at the University of California at San Diego. And he wrote a book. And I decided that it would also be my year for writing a book. And that was when I wrote my first collection. My first book was actually not The Thief. It was Instead of Three Wishes, which is a collection of short stories. I'm going to talk just a little bit more about that later. But now I want to say that a year later, after I had written Three Wishes, my husband got another fellowship. And this time we were going to be in the San Francisco Bay Area for a year. But we went back to San Diego one more time. And while I was there that summer, surrounded by a landscape that reminded me so much of the Greek Mediterranean landscape, I started to write The Thief. And I think on reflection, that the landscape obviously and the setting of a book for me is fundamental to me being able to tell a story. And that's true within the story, but I think it's also true just on the outside of the story. I think it really made a difference in my creative life that I was living in San Diego in that landscape at the time. It was sort of the perfect writing prompt to have the olive trees and the ocean and the beach and the sea air and all of those things that I put into my book. I think that we're going to talk a little bit later about what we need in order to write and how individual that is. But I want to tell you just a little bit more before we go any further about Instead of Three Wishes. That first summer that we were in San Diego, I had an idea that I would write a book. I had an idea that I would start by practicing with short stories. And so I sat down and worked out a bunch of the short stories that I had been telling my husband over the years. And he suggested that I send them to somebody and see if they liked them as much as he did. I did. I sent them to a writer named Diana Wynne Jones, and she recommended me to her publisher. So I sent a couple of my stories to the editor at Green Willow Books. And the thing that I didn't understand at the time about publishing was that there was a market for my short stories. I had written them as practice, and I still think that they were the best kind of practice for me. But I needed to know that I could start something and finish it, that I could take a rough draft and that I could polish it, and that I could bring something of a reasonable size to a point that I was happy with it. And that was my whole goal in writing those short stories. And I think that gave me a certain amount of freedom when I was writing them. And I had no idea when I sent them to Green Willow that they would actually want to publish them. I was sending them in as a writing sample. I thought that maybe if they liked my short stories, when I eventually got around to writing a book, they would be interested in the book. But in fact, they were interested in the short stories. And I think that the lesson that I took from that is it's really important to write what you need to write. And when you have written that, go see if there's an audience for it. One of the most important things I tell writers is that they need to know why they're writing, what they're writing, and who they want their audience to be. Excuse me, one second. I knew that my audience was me for those short stories, and it gave me a tremendous freedom to write something that pleased me. And I've always been just surprised and thrilled that I can write what pleases me and that other people will want to read it. Sometimes, well, often I think you get trapped into writing something that is not your voice, not what you wanted to write. And there are all kinds of times when that's actually not a bad thing. You have a job to do. You have something to communicate. You use your writing skills to communicate something. And when you do that, you're doing you have a different goal. When you're writing what's your work, I think it's very important to protect your ability to write what it is that you want to write and not let yourself be misled into writing what you think other people want you to write. So when I wrote The Thief, it was my first novel. I sent it off to my editor, Susan Hirschman. She was very happy. She's published it. And much to absolutely everyone's surprise, it received a Newbery Honor in 1996. And that is, the world has changed a lot since then. But back then, that Newbery Honor, the Newbery discussions, all of the conversation about this prize for children's books was very secretive. It's still very secretive. They're never allowed to talk about what books they're considering. They never make a short list or a long list. They just announce who is the winner and who are the 2 or 3 or 4 honor books. These days, because of the internet, everybody can talk about it. Everybody can make guesses. It's a lot more clear who might be in the running for a prize. But at the time, it just came out of the blue. And when my editor called to congratulate me, she handed the phone to a librarian who was with her. And that librarian said to me, "When is the sequel coming?" Now, I had been writing a completely different book. I hadn't been planning to write a sequel to The Thief. I had thought of it as a standalone book. But as soon as this librarian said this to me, I realized I don't want to write that other book. I want to go back and write more about all the things that I knew about this world and about the people and about the characters that didn't fit in that first book. This was my chance to go write a sequel. And my editor said one of the most important things to me that really shaped my career for the last 25 years. And that is, take as long as you need to write the book. In my world, people tend to write one book a year and turn out a book a year, or some people are even more prolific than that. And so there is a certain amount of pressure to get your writing done quickly. And I have been deeply, deeply grateful to my publisher, my editors, that they have always supported me in taking as long as I needed to write the book that I needed to write. And I think that, as I said, the pressure to get a book done quickly, or to get a book for the market, or to get people's expectations met instead of what you want to write, can be one of the most challenging things that a writer has to deal with, because you deal with that all by yourself. You listen to the voice inside your head telling you what other people want. And that is something that I encourage you to watch for when you're thinking about your writing. I think that I have now written, it took 25 years to write the 6 books in my series. And over time, so many things have changed in my writing, in the world, in publishing. And if you guys have any questions about any of those things, I'd be happy to do whatever I can to answer them. And over to you now.
Thank you, Mbak Megan. Terima kasih. Jadi teman-teman, saya ambil poinnya saja ya, Mbak Megan tadi cerita. Jadi untuk beliau settingnya dulu, baru kemudian beliau membuat ceritanya, bukunya. Dan yang pertama dia membuat 3 Wishes, itu short stories, untuk dia trial pembuatan buku, tetapi ternyata publishernya bilang, sudah kita langsung publish aja. Karena short stories itu bagi dia hanya trial untuk dia sendiri, tapi publishernya suka. Kemudian dia bilang oke, terus dia tulis The Thief, yang karena dia pergi ke Greece dan settingnya settingnya di Yunani, maka The Thief itu seperti di Yunani. Kemudian setelah dia mendapatkan Newbery Honor Book dan librariannya bilang, kamu buat sequelnya dong. Kemudian dibilang oke. Jadi dia buat sequelnya menjadi 6 buku. Dan apa yang Mbak Megan bilang untuk para penulis, untuk kita teman-teman semua, tulislah apa yang mau kamu tulis. Dan mengapa kamu menulis? Apa yang akan kamu tulis? Siapa yang nanti akan membaca? Dan ambillah waktu selamanya kamu menulis. Jadi kalau misalnya bisa membuat konsep, oke, setahun saya tulis 1 buku. Tapi kalau tidak bisa ya tidak apa-apa. Karena itu kan tergantung kita. Kalau memang bisa setahun 1 buku bisa. Tapi kalau mau setahun 2 buku lebih bagus. Atau 2 tahun baru 1 buku, iya, karena orang lain-lain. Jadi poin-poin yang Mbak Megan tulis, yang Mbak Megan sampaikan seperti itu. Sekarang waktunya kita untuk question and answer. Silakan. Floor.
Oke, ini udah ada satu penanya ya.
Okay.
We have one participant here. He said that I don't know, this is she or she. His name is Naya. Where is Naya? Naya will want to ask something to Miss Megan. He is a 10 years old participant. I think the youngest one in here. Naya, go ahead, Naya. Okay, this is Naya. unmute your unmute, please. Okay. Go
Hello.
ahead. Hello,
Hello.
Naya.
Well, I'm writing a novel. The first idea was that I make a novel called the mysterious things, and then it was actually I thought I was going to write many stories, but all of them are mysterious, but all of them are short, and then I make it into one book. But then once I write a little bit of a rough draft for the story, it was called The Mysterious Girl. And then my dad read the draft, and then he said, maybe we can make it into something bigger. Maybe it can be not only a short story, but a whole novel in itself. So now the mysterious girl already changed into Morning, Good Evening. I'm writing a novel. I'm still stuck though. I haven't written much. I've write like 3 chapters, and I need when sometimes I just open my laptop and then I open the file, and then once I put my hands to the keyboard, I don't know what to write, even though I already know the flow of the story. How can we stop doing that and be more productive while writing a novel or story? Thank you.
Thank you very much. That was a wonderful question. There's what I usually tell people is that the good news is that there's no one way to be successful at writing, and the bad news is that there's no one way to be successful at writing. One of the most difficult things that you have to do is figure out what works for you. Now, you are 10, you have a whole lifetime ahead of you of writing, and you will see probably that there are always a lot of people who want to tell you how to do it. And people will say, oh, what you have to do is you have to sit in your chair every day at a specific time. And if you don't do it every single day, well, then you're never going to be a writer. And other people will say, no, what you have to do is you have to set yourself up certain words that you're going to write in a day, no matter what. And you have to make sure that you make that word count every day, or you're not going to be a writer. What I have found over the years is that what I need to do to be a writer has changed. Year by year by year, the things that I need to do vary. They're not always the same. There's never one surefire thing that's going to work for you. But what you can do is try to have a conversation with yourself about what it is you're working on, why it might not be working, how you feel about what you're working on, and how you want that feeling to change. So if you're finding that you go to your keyboard and you put your hands on your keyboard and you can't write something, many times what's happening is writing is a process that happens in different parts of your mind. Sometimes you are writing and the words are at the forefront of your mind and you can write them down. But sometimes the story that you're telling has not yet formed to that point. You might be doing extremely valuable work on your story when you're sitting at the keyboard and you're not typing anything. And in my experience, the only person who knows whether you're working or not is you. I know it's easy to judge your output, to judge your work by how much of it you've actually written already. People think, oh, I have written 1,000 pages of my book. It's not how many pages you've written. You could have write 10,000 pages and not be any closer to being done with your book. So don't worry about the page count. Don't worry about the word count. Think about whether you're happy with your story. Think about whether you want it to be a novel, or maybe it was always meant to be a short story. And maybe that's why you're not making progress. Or maybe you just have a problem in it, in the storytelling or in a character. Take the time in your head to work that out. You don't have to write the words down. Now, those are problems of creation. The other problem is more like what we talk about with writer's block. If you can't write because you're afraid it won't be very good, or you can't write because you have so many ideas that you can't get any of them to come out first, if there are problems there, well, then what you need to do, and I think you have just an absolutely wonderful resource here. If your problem is actually worrying about your words, or not being able to pick your words, or writing something and then being unhappy with it and you throw it away, then it's wonderful to have a group like this, because so many of you, I'm sure, have the kind of techniques that help somebody deal with problems of anxiety or order or organization or things like that. And for those sorts of things, what you should try to do is whichever one that works. Try something. If somebody has advice about, oh, try just sitting down every day at the same time. Try it. See if it works. And if it doesn't work, don't hesitate to stop trying it. You will find the best things that work for you, whether it's outlining the work you want to do in a day, or whether it's spending 5 minutes. As a technique, sometimes when I don't know what I want to write for the day, 5 minutes writing as fast as I can, whatever comes into my mind, sometimes that helps me. So I think turn to the writers around you and see what works for them, and try it yourself, and you will find your way.
Okay, thank you, Miss Megan.
Good luck.
Thank you.
We have another 3 participants. We'll ask you some questions. We will start with Pinkan. Okay, Pinkan, go ahead. Oh,
Yes.
this is Ciara, bukan
Yeah.
Pinkan ya.
My name is Chiara, and I'm a really big fan of the Thieves series. I've been reading it since I was a kid and rereading it. And I've always been in awe of the way that your world just seems so fully fleshed out, even from the first book. And then as the story gets a little more political, the plotting and the characterization is always something that stood out to me. So I was wondering how you approached doing or planning those things in the process of writing.
So there's like a huge answer to that question. I mentioned Tolkien as a huge influence. But another even more important influence on my writing was a British author named Rosemary Sutcliffe. She wrote historical fiction set in 400 AD in Roman Britain. and some in the medieval period of Britain. But her books were not very long. You know, you had The Lord of the Rings, which was huge, and you had Rosemary Sutcliffe, which was not. And yet her books tended to be very, very dense. They were published in the 1950s. And I loved them when I was growing up. And another author who I loved was Joan Aiken, and another British author published in the 1950s. And both of these people, one of them dealing in a sort of fantasy world, and the other one with historical fiction, were both just masters of world building, but also economy. They didn't go into really long chapters and huge descriptions. And so when I sat down to write The Thief, I knew that I wanted to write a fantasy novel, but I wanted it to feel like the historical fiction that Rosemary Sutcliffe wrote. Mm-hmm. So that was sort of the input into the book that I took from other writers, that to help me set the goal for what I wanted the book to sound like. I mentioned that I didn't want it to look like Middle Earth. I also didn't want to write an 800-page book describing what the world looked like. So one of the things that I do in my books, in all of them, is instead of writing a big long description, I give the reader a cue, and I allow them to do the work of creating the landscape, creating the setting, and in many cases, the characterization. So I don't want to write big fat books. And one of the ways I avoid having to write big fat books is I make my reader do the work, which is
sama aja prosesnya ya,
so that means that that I take very brief descriptions that I know will evoke either a lot of information or a lot of visual stimulation, and I use that in my writing, so that my books tend to be a sort of combined creation of my words and the way the reader thinks. And I talked to Swasti about this yesterday. That means that I have to accept that readers will make different books out of my words, or different stories out of my words, that every reader creates the story in their head, and that I'm not entirely in control of that. Although I feel like I've been very lucky to have fabulous readers who have done such work and enjoyed my books and really gotten what I most hoped that they would out of my stories. And the other thing is, I just did a lot of reading. I know I don't usually decide on what I want to write and then do the research for it. I just like to do a lot of reading about subjects that I enjoy. And then when I'm writing, it's those subjects that I enjoy that I sort of pick facts from in order to do my world building. So in terms of writing, I really recommend being widely read and using the things that you know to make your worlds seem most real. Does that answer the question? I hope that answered the question.
It does. Thank you so much.
Okay, Tiara, terima kasih. Next question is coming from Billy Muren. Go ahead, Billy.
Wait.
Yes.
Can you turn on your video? Okay, that's good.
Okay. So, my name is Billy Moran, and I'm 15 years old. I'm an alternate alternative universe author, and I have two book that released as book into a book. And Megan, I have some questions for you. Uh, Sometimes it's hard to me to find some inspiration or ideas for stories, and how to make it easy to find story ideas. Thank you.
I mentioned Joan Aiken, British writer. She has written my very favorite short stories. She wrote novels as well. She wrote for adults, she wrote for children, but she wrote these absolutely amazing short stories. And she once said that she felt that the best short story is one that actually has two ideas in it and two plot lines or events that sort of operate simultaneously and resolve together at the end. So bad news is you not only have to find a story idea, you have to find two. What I usually find is that that there's usually a seed of a story, and that it doesn't grow until you find what else it needs. And so the simplest ideas for stories, they're all around, and that my thought process is that I can't start working on a project until I have not one thing that's going to be happening in that story, but another cross-secting set of events that will that give you an opportunity to really examine something that interests you. So in terms of finding ideas, I wrote a story called The Baby in the Night Deposit Box. And the night deposit box is, in a bank building. There will often be an armored sort of slot in the side wall. And when people need to make a deposit to the bank and the bank is closed, they have a little slot like in a mailbox that they can drop their deposit into it, and the bank will come in, open up in the morning, and see all of the deposits there and record them. And I remember it was probably 1989, and I thought, well, obviously you put valuable things into a night deposit box. You put your money, you put your treasure, you put things you really want to keep safe. And I thought, what if somebody put their baby in the night deposit box because they wanted it to be really safe? And I thought this was a great idea. And it was 10 years before I came up with the rest of the story and the reason why somebody would put a baby into the night deposit box thinking that was the best way to keep the baby safe. So sometimes what you have to do is sit on the ideas. But one of the things that I find that helps in finding things to write about is that I often write in response to things that I read. So if you're finding yourself struggling to find an idea that you want to write about, think about what you like to read best. That's very helpful. But then think about what you like least and go look at that. Because sometimes you read things that you don't like and you realize you have something better to say. And so if I'm stuck for ideas, one of the things that I do is I read things and I think about what I would have done with that idea. And sometimes that shakes loose completely new things. So I hope that helps.
Yeah. Thank you.
Sure. Good luck.
Oke, Billy, terima kasih ya. The next question is coming from Ibu Ida. Silakan ya Ibu Ida. Unmute please, Bu Ida. Oke.
Thank you, Mbak Vina. First, I'd like to thank Megan for sharing with us here. It's very honored to have you here. And Mbak Swasti yang sudah mempertemukan kita dengan Mbak Megan pada malam hari ini. Thank you, Mbak. Megan, I'm really interested in your sharing previously on the protecting our ability to write, then misled by what other people want you to write. Maybe you can elaborate more on this because I think I need to know more about these things in writing, because sometimes we, especially I experience myself, that we need to work together with other people's in writing some things. And we need to write what they want or the message that they want to convey in our writings, right? And how we protect our ability in writings, such kind of things, Megan. And the second one I want to know is how is your writing routines every day? I know every writers have different routines in writings, but I'm really interested to know your writing routines, because you have so many experiences moving around, right, with the different settings. But you specifically mentioned again and again Greece, and it's
Greece and also Greece.
Yeah. Okay, I think that's all my questions for you. Thank you, Megan.
So let me say about writing routines, it's much like what I said before, is that it's important to figure out what you need in order to write. And my husband likes to say the proof is in the pudding. If you're writing, it's working. And when I was younger, I used to be able to write in like 15-minute stretches. I would go upstairs, I had an idea, I would write some things down, or I would redo a paragraph that I had been thinking about while I was making dinner. I've noticed that the older I get, the more I have to protect the consistency of the writing time. That if I do have a break, something, there's a trip or there's a holiday or something happens and there's no time for writing, I now find that I just have to sit in front of my computer, waiting, as I think it was Naya said, with my fingers over the computer for something to happen. And that time period before I start to write has gotten longer and longer as I got older, which can be very frustrating, that I want to be able to write and I sit down for an entire day. Now, it usually does take me a couple of days to get back into being focused and being able to write again if there's been an interruption. And one of the things that 3, 4, 5 years ago, I really had to tell myself that I would sit in front of the computer until I started to write, and it didn't matter how long it took. And I would literally spend the entire day doodling on a piece of paper and looking at the screen and daydreaming, but not leaving my chair until I'd written something. And that meant that so many other things did not get done. Things like laundry and dishes and dinner, and we're having, going out for dinner again, because that's what it took for me to write. And so I don't know what you might need to write, but I do know that one thing that can be very difficult is how silly you feel about what you need. And so you don't do that. You can't really believe that you need to have a bunch of apples sitting on the desk beside you in order to work. But there's at least one famous British composer of music who always had to have a bowl of rotting apples on the piano, and he would smell them and he would compose music. So I urge you, whatever silly thing it is, whatever complicated thing it is, whatever ridiculous thing it is that you do that helps you write, then go do it. And it's worth it because you're writing. Now, about protecting your writing, all of us write for other people. When you have a job and you're working, producing copy, whether it's for a website or a magazine or a newspaper, what your audience demands affects what you write. And when you're writing fiction or a memoir or something, yes, your audience really determines what you write. But you get to pick your audience. So what matters if your audience, I wrote The Thief, and if you look on the inside of The Thief, you'll see that I wrote that book for my high school friend, Sandy Passarelli. I wrote that book for an audience of one. The only thing that mattered to me when I was writing that book was, would it make her happy? And that book was a success when it made her happy. The fact that other people also enjoyed it was a wonder and a delight and a surprise. But even if no one else in the world had liked that book, I wrote it for Sandy. She was my audience. She was happy with it. So remember I said that you can write 1,000 pages and not be any closer to finishing your book? We judge how good a book is by how many people read it. So a bestseller is a great book. Everybody should want to be a bestseller and make the New York Times bestseller list and have hundreds of that. Everybody should be J.K. Rowling and have millions of people around the world read the Harry Potter. I don't think that's true. The whole millions of people in the world are not reading my books, and they're not going to read my books. And I didn't write a book for 1 million people. I write my books for very specific audiences. I write my books for people who like the kind of books that I like to read. And I like the kind of I write my books for the kind of readers who are willing to do a certain amount of work in order to enjoy what I've written. And that's just never going to be hundreds of millions of people in the world. And I think that that's not only okay, I think is really important, especially for a group of people who might be writing to a smaller audience. It's important to know that your book isn't better or worse depending on how many people you're writing for. Your book is better if it succeeds with the audience you chose for it. And sometimes you write for your own community and other people read it and they don't even understand what you're talking about. But you do. The people you're writing do. And that's really, really important. The other thing I wanted to say is, I don't know if any of you are familiar with fan fiction. That's when, you watch the Star Trek movies and then you make up all of your own stories about Star Trek, and Fan fiction is an enormous thing. Talk about hundreds of millions of readers, hundreds of millions of writers, and there's a certain writing style to fan fiction, because people who write it and people who enjoy reading it aren't trying to have what we consider a fully fleshed out novel. They just want certain good bits. And they want to be able to get to the good bits, and they want to enjoy the good bits, and they don't want to do all of the work necessarily involved in creating new characters or a new plot or anything. They just want to write this one scene that they love, or they do want to write a whole short story with the characters. But if you're writing fan fiction and that's what you want to write, then write fan fiction and enjoy yourself. And if you want to write something that historians will read, all 6 of them, I mean, I will say that my husband's a professor. I frequently travel with him when he goes to conferences, and I am frequently introduced as the wife of Mark Turner. And when he comes to conferences with me, or book signings with me, then he's introduced as the husband of Whalen Turner. And the first time we went to the American Library Association convention of librarians, and they said, well, who are you? And he said, well, I'm Mr. Whalen Turner. And they said, oh, do you write books too? And he said, yes. And they said, oh, what books? And are they published? And would I know your name? And he said, well, my books are avidly read by 100 people. And they thought that he would say hundreds of thousands of people, or no, his books really are avidly read by this very small population of people in his field. And he obviously wouldn't have it any other way. He knows his audience and he writes for his audience. So when it comes to protecting your writing, one of the only things you can do in your own head is know who your audience is, and that you get to say to yourself, at least, who that audience is. And then sometimes you have to write for audiences you don't want to write for, like the young people here who all have to turn in papers for teachers. Know your audience, make your audience happy. That's just what you got to do. But know that in your own writing, that you get to define in your head who the audience is that you're writing for. And that I think that helps people write what is most important to them, because it's most important to some audience that they know. So I hope that answered the question.
Sure, really is. I'm happy to hear that, Megan. Thank you so much.
Oke, makasih ya Mbak Ida. The next question is coming from Priza. Priza, please go ahead.
Hold on.
Can you turn on your camera, please?
Oh, there you go.
Okay. You have a very big fan of a young reader in here, Megan.
I'm very excited to see them.
Yeah. Okay, Priza, go ahead.
Yeah. Yeah. So there's a
We cannot hear you. Can you fix your
and I'm not a novel. Hello.
Okay, go ahead. Try again.
Okay. So I'm glad that my mom give me the link.
We cannot
sorry, the story writing session.
Priza, we cannot really hear you. Can you please fix your speaker?
there's some distortion. I'm not able to hear, but if you want to type your message into the chat, I can try to read it.
Hello.
Okay, Priza, can you type your question into the chat chat room, because it is not easy to hear you now.
Oh.
Okay, we can give the next question to Mbak Bini first. Is that okay? Riza, while you are writing your question, we'll give the question to Mbak Bini ya. Oke, Mbak Bini, silakan.
Hello, good evening, Ibu Megan and all friends from the writers. First of all, I would like to congratulate you for your success and also to thank you very much for being able to join us, and also thank you very much for Swasti, whom I call Pipit, for organizing this, and for all my teachers here, Pak Budiman, Pak Asep, and Ibu Devina. I'm very new at creative writing, Megan, and I think I worry a lot when I started writing. I did remember what Pa Asep and Ombud keep telling us. There's no such thing as writer's block. And they have given us very great techniques in overcoming the writing blocks. And that helped me. But tonight, hearing you saying, don't worry about what people are going to say about your writing, but you do have to know to whom you're going to write. And that's my second worry. To whom am I going to write? Because so far I think I've been writing about, my stories, someone else's stories. I don't know whether it's going to be interesting or not, but I keep writing anyway. And it's really interesting to hear you saying that you do write for the people that you think you will like your writing, and yet you have been able to produce books that has been bestsellers. So how did you do that? Thank you.
So I mentioned fan fiction, and lots of times people write for the sheer pleasure of writing. And there's nothing wrong with that if that's their goal. My goal was to write a book for my friend Sandy, but it was also to write it really, really well. To be able to write like Rosemary Sutcliffe. I wanted to write like Joan Aiken. I wanted to write like Diana Wynne Jones. And I had my own idea of what was good. And when I looked at my writing, I was either satisfied with it or I hated it. I sort of have two opposite feelings. It's either good or I should just carry it out into the backyard and set fire to it, is how I usually feel about my writing. And so when I'm writing my story for Sandy or my editor, I am writing it with them in mind, but I am writing it to my own standards. And I think because of that, that writing appeals to more than just the one person that I was writing it for. So it's possible, though, that I could have written something really, really, really well written, and Sandy Passarelli could have loved it, and it still could not have found another audience. Sometimes that does happen, and you have to decide what your goal is in writing it. If you want to reach another audience, then you have to make your writing into what they want to read. But only you can decide whether you want to do that. But you also know when your writing is not as satisfying to you as it should be. One way I find this out is I put it away for a while, and then I come back and I look at it again. And often I will like write a draft. I will put the draft away for a while. I let it sit for a month or 6 weeks. I come back to it. And the thing that I thought was really, really good is not any good anymore. And I hate it. And then I write it again. And then I put it away again. And I keep doing that until I can go back and read what I wrote and I'm happy with it. And sometimes that takes me 7 years, which is awkward. But I don't want to ever let go of anything that I've written until I am really, really happy that I did it well. So there's two things. Is my audience happy with the writing? And am I happy with it? And I think that it's my persistence in making it something that I like that has also made it something that other people want to read. There was another thought floating around in my head. Give me a second. Oh, so I wrote I wrote The Thief, and the librarian asked me to write a sequel, and I realized I wanted to write The Queen of Attolia. And I don't know how many of you have read The Queen of Attolia, but something unfortunate and violent happens in the very first chapter of that book. And I write for children. And at the time, this kind of thing did not happen in children's books. And I wasn't really sure I could get away with that in a children's book. And I had real concerns that my editor was going to say, Megan, you can't do that. And I knew that if my editor, who I greatly respected, said, Megan, you can't do that, I'd give up. I wouldn't do it. I'd go do something else. But I wanted to try. So I didn't tell my editor anything about the book. She waited years. I think probably like 2 years at that point. And she would ask, am I writing? And I would say, yep, working on it, writing a lot, it's going great. And she'd say, so do you want to tell me anything about it? And I'd say, no, not. And I never told her anything about what I was going to do in that book. But the whole time that I was writing it, I was focused on her, because I knew she had to say it was good or it wouldn't be published. And if she said it wasn't, if I finished the book and I sent her the book and she said, hey, Megan, you can't do this, well, then I would know I had done my best, my very best, and it didn't work. But I didn't want her to shoot the idea down before she had seen my very, very best. And so I finished that book. It was done before the first time she read it. And so I knew that it was my best version of that story. And when she said that she also liked it, then it went out into the world. But I really think that you are the only person who can hold yourself accountable for your writing. You're the only one who knows whether this is the best job you can do. And you're the only one who knows if it really satisfies you. Does it say what you really wanted it to say? And that's the best you can do. But it's what you have to do. You can't let go of something and put it out in the world if you don't think it's the best that you can do. And now, again, I hope I answered that question. You have to hold your, well, the thing that I tell young writers when I go into schools is that the biggest enemy of writers is self-indulgence. There's all kinds of self-indulgence that can undermine you. You think, well, I won't write today. I'm busy. I'm tired. I don't have time. And then you don't write. When really what you should have said to yourself is go sit down and get your writing done. And you read something that you've written and it's not really what you wanted, and you didn't get the right word, and you think maybe, but you're like, I really want to get on to the next part. So I'm just going to keep going, and I'll forget that I didn't fix this. And then you go back and you read this thing that you've written, and there are all these places that you didn't fix because you didn't feel like it. It was hard and you didn't want to. And now you have something that's not as good as it could be. So watch out for self-indulgence. Protect your writing. Don't be self-indulgent. I hope that helps.
Thank you so much. It's very, very helpful. Thank you very much, Megan.
Okay, Priza already put the
Okay.
okay, already wrote the question in the chat room. Can you please
Okay, now I'm
answer
gonna
it, Megan?
I'm going to step out of the screen and read it without my glasses on. Hang on.
Okay.
Who's
I see it's a question about world building. And actually that sounds like a wonderful career path to go into. Graphic novels, I think, is sometimes we say manga and sometimes we say graphic novels, and it's in the United States, it's not really clear that what people mean when they use those words, because lots of times a graphic novel is in fact not fiction, it's nonfiction, but we still call it a novel, which is usually the word reserved for fiction. But world building, I have to think about that because as I said, my world building is finding the cues that will encourage people to do the world building. So it's not that you have 100 details that you add to a scene in order to build a world. You have to find the few details that have sort of the most emotional resonance that will like push a button in a reader's head. And when that button is pushed, they have a response. They imagine a scene, they imagine a landscape, or they fill in the background of a whole character because you have found that one thing that you needed to say. And I don't have all that much advice on how you find that one thing, except that you sit quietly in front of a computer screen and you pick through all of the details and you pick the ones that you think will have that effect, and you give it a try and you see if it works. And I'd be very interested actually to know about how that works in a visual medium. I don't have a whole lot of advice because I think that it must have a great deal to do with the illustrator that you're working with, who helps to create the world. I know that, sorry, I'm just about all talked out. I know that I have a friend, Shannon Hale, and she has worked in many different mediums. She does novels, she does short stories, but she also does graphic novels and screenplays. And I think I would recommend that you go take a look at some of her graphic novels and also read her books, because I think that that might help you see what are the things that translate between the writing fiction in words and presenting storytelling in words and pictures. And I know that that she works very closely with her illustrator, and that a lot of the details for the world building are not in the words that she captions, that the characters are saying in the story. They're in the descriptions that she writes out to give to the illustrator. So I know this because I've seen the drafts that she prepares to give to the illustrator, which unfortunately I can't share with you, but you may actually be able to find of those things, the exchanges between the author and the illustrator, in which that world building information is transmitted. That would be my best guess. I'm sorry, I think that was not my most helpful answer, but I'm afraid I don't know very much about visual storytelling.
Okay, Riza, cukup ya? Yeah. Next question is coming from Naya again. Okay, Naya, that's still okay, Megan? It's over one hour now.
We're probably going to have to wrap it up pretty soon because I'm running out of voice.
Okay, no problem. One more question from Naya. Go ahead, Naya.
I actually have 2 questions, but it's actually, I think it'll be very easy for you to answer. So the first one is, do I have to be an expert on story build, on world building or not, to be a novel, to be an author?
I think the answer is yes. People tend to talk about world building when they're talking about fantasy. So if I have a world with dragons in it, I have to make you believe in that world so that you can enjoy a story set in that world. But world building is just as important in fiction, in historical fiction. I think you always have to, now I'm gonna back up. Yes, I think that in the works that you see published and that you see lots of people reading and that people talk about as being really good books, one important part of being a really good book is the world building. The reader feels like this story is taking place inside of a real world. Think about going to a theater and the stage sets are just 2-dimensional and painted. Sometimes you go to the theater and there's no staging at all. It's just 2 people standing on an empty stage talking to each other. And it's brilliant. And there's no background world for them at all. So it's not impossible to have a story that really doesn't have a background, but it's very, very unusual. And I think it would also be very, very hard, much harder actually to create a good story without that world building than it is to do world building as a way to support your story. So the short answer is, I really think you should work on world building. Yes, world building is great and wonderful. And I recommend that you look at books and read the ones that you like best and look at how they built the world.
All right. Can you answer one more?
I think I got one more in me. Yes.
Okay. So how can I find out what genre I am writing? What theme is it to my novel? Well, since Morning Good Evening is like a kind of like a mystery one, but I don't think I can make it as mystery because it's more like a full of plot kind of story. Like suddenly, oh no, and then there's a oh yes, and then there's a oh no again. So how can I find out what is the theme to my story?
I sometimes you don't find out a theme until you've written it. So don't worry about what genre it is. Lots of stories don't fit neatly into a category. Lots of stories are not just a mystery or a space opera or a thriller. Lots of stories, they fall in between, and that's fine. So don't worry about whether it's enough of a mystery or whether it's a plot-driven thing. Just write. You write what you want to write. You make the best book you can. But sometimes after you've written it, for instance, I wrote Thick as Thieves. And it was a book written in response to The Eagle of the Ninth by Rosemary Sutcliffe. I read that book when I was your age and I loved it. And years later, I sort of wrote a response to that book. And I didn't realize until I had mostly finished the book that the theme of the book was really about different kinds of very close relationships between people. Some relationships that were healthy and some relationships that were unhealthy, and some relationships that were beneficial to people and cooperative, and some that were abusive. And that over the whole course of my book, I had been examining these different kinds of relationships among people. That wasn't what I thought I was doing when I set out to write the book. I was telling a story, and I didn't recognize that theme until the book was almost done. And then I went back and made some changes. Now that I'd recognized the theme, I went back and I made some changes to emphasize the things about it I wanted to emphasize, given that that was the theme of the book. But that happens sometimes at the end. So don't worry about that. Just write the book that you want to write and see how it comes out. And then you might see some things in your writing that you didn't even realize you put there. That's another good reason why it's good to put it away for a little while, get it back out, look at it with a fresh pair of eyes, and then maybe you see some things you didn't understand you were putting into the book at the time, and you like them, and you want to make some changes to emphasize them. But that can all come much later. For now, you just write. And I think it's probably going to be wonderful. So good luck.
Okay. Okay. Terima kasih.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
You
Thank
are
you, Naya.
welcome.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, I think this is over 1 hour now. Megan, I understand that you have to leave very soon. Can you please give us like closing speech before we end up the session?
Oh, a closing speech. I don't know if I have exactly a closing speech exactly, more like a request. I said that that Tolkien was such a huge influence on not just my writing, but on my entire field. I mean, there was 40 years where everything was really just a Tolkien book or an imitation of a Tolkien book. And when I was growing up, I read American authors, but a lot of my very favorite books were British. Sutcliffe, Diana Wynne Jones, Joan Aiken, Peter Dickinson. I loved those books. But there was a certain similarity to all of them. The traditional books of my childhood were British, Eurocentric, and that has been almost no change happened in that world until about 20 years ago. Children's books, especially in the United States, had very little diversity. You know, the same kinds of people in the stories, the same kinds of stories were told, the same communities were represented in the stories. And it's only in the last 20 years or so that we have really started to see other people's stories being available for children to read in the United States. I mean, for one thing, when I was growing up, it was almost impossible to find books written in translation in the United States. All the books on the library shelves in the United States were in English, originally published in English. And I think it's just a wonderful thing that more books are available to children written by more different kinds of people from more places and from different communities. So when I ask you guys to protect your writing and to write, I am saying that not just because I'm a nice person and I want to encourage you. I'm saying it because it's selfish and it really serves me. I would like to read your work. So I hope that all of you will keep writing and that you will, whatever your audience is, or whatever you think your audience is, you will write and your books will find their audience and maybe I will be reading them someday. So good luck to all of you. It was very nice to meet you. And thank you very much for having me here today. I've really enjoyed talking to you.
Wow.
Thank you so
That was a very good, a very inspiring closing speech from you. It is a very fruitful session for us as well. And by the way, have you realized that your book has been translated in Indonesian and has been published in here?
Is it available? I mean,
Yeah.
I did know that it had been published into Indonesian, but I didn't know whether it was still in print in Indonesia.
It is in print. It's still in print and still available in Gramedia bookstore. Yeah.
Yeah, that's really great.
It's the biggest bookstore in here.
Is it just The Thief?
No, there are about six books in here. 6 titles in here. Yeah.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. That's very
Surprisingly.
good.
Just like that.
Yeah, they sometimes get translated and they get printed, but that doesn't mean that people can actually find them on a bookshelf, or maybe they're available for 1 year, but then never again. So I'm thrilled to hear that they're actually there. That's great news.
Yeah, they're still available. Do you recommend, because I just start to read your books, not like Chiara that has been reading your book years ago. I just started last week. Do you recommend to read the books in order?
I think that I wrote the books, each of them to stand alone.
Okay.
So if I grew up reading books in the library, and lots of times you go to the library and they have a series, but they only have the second book and the fifth book, right? And I always wanted, no matter what book is on the shelf at the library, you can start with that book instead of having to wait until you get them in order. That said, I wouldn't start with the sixth one, but pretty much any of the other ones, yes, you can just pick it up, whichever book you get first, you can start with. Yeah.
Okay, that's cool. All right. Ombud, do you have something to share with Megan?
What, yeah? Okay, first of all, of course, we are very happy to have you here, Megan. We live in a different country, we have a different time, but still we can meet each other through Zoom. That's amazing. Thanks to technology, of course. And buat teman-teman yang lain ya, jangan segan-segan untuk menulis ya. Sebab salah satu penulis favorit saya yang namanya Stanley, yang dia penulis dari Spider-Man. Stanley said, if you have an idea that you genuinely think is good, don't let some idiot talk you out of it.
Exactly.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much, Megan. We hope that we will meet each other again sometime in another forum. And
I hope sometime, maybe where some of you are.
Yes, yes,
Yeah.
true.
Maybe when you have a new book.
Yeah,
Yes.
you can. we can have it again in here. Okay, Mbak Swasti, silakan.
Okay, so thank you very much, Megan, for having you as our guest. It's an honorable guest. Thank you for your time. Thank you, the writers, to facilitate this. Om Bud, Kang Asep, Mbak Devina, and all our friends tonight come over here, except some of us in US. And we have some things, for us is special, but maybe for you, we're not sure. These are the stuff for you. So could you see, Megan?
Oh,
So we have,
it's very,
we have
it's,
the
it's
map.
very small, but you know,
Sorry.
the picture is very small.
So, okay.
I
Batik.
don't know how to make it bigger, but it looks beautiful.
Like that? Batik.
Oh,
map.
yeah. Yeah, Swasti, it looks gorgeous.
And then the cosmetics. Can you see it?
No, I can't. Because there are so many of you in the, oh, wait, maybe I can, I know.
Yeah. You can.
I've had you in.
Yes.
Speaker.
Go to Swasti. And then this one, could you see this? It means before you die, make at least one book.
Oh, that's great. That's wonderful.
Yes.
Those are gorgeous. Thank you.
Yes. So this is
lovely.
all for you. This is all for you. And
Oh,
I have to
thank
drop
you.
it in your house.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. We'll work that out over the text. Thank you. It's beautiful.
Yes.
And I think that's
Yes.
really
These are all from us.
how wonderful that the words are exactly what I have just said to you. Make a book.
Yes.
I hope all of you will go make a book, make many books.
Sure, we will.
After this, we
will.
will.
Okay.
Yeah, the tagline of the writers is make a book, at least one book before you die.
Yes.
Mhm.
Right. Yes.
That's what Om Bud
That's
has been saying.
absolutely splendid advice. Yes.
Relentlessly.
Okay. I will say goodbye now. Thank you.
Okay, thank
Thank
you
you,
so
Megan.
much.
Thank you very much for
Thanks,
having me.
Megan.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you. Thank you very much.
Megan, Mbak
Good,
Swasti, Om Bud.
For
David.
that beautiful song.
Okay.
You,
Most of
Thank
all,
you.
thank you very
Thank
much for the
you.
beautiful song.
Mbak Devina.
Okay. Thank you, Ombud.
Yeah,
Bye
thank
bye.
you, Megan.
Terima
Bye.
kasih semuanya.
Thank you, Asep.
Terima kasih
Makasih
Om Bud,
semua,
Mbak
Kang
Devina,
Asep, Om Bud.
Mbak
Mbak
Swasti,
Swasti,
dan
terima kasih
semuanya
ya.
ya.
Terima kasih
Terima
semuanya.
kasih banyak.
Terima kasih semuanya.
Harus bikin
Selamat
lagi minggu depan,
malam.
Om Bud.
Selamat istirahat.
Yo.